We have seen how important emotions are simply because the acceptance of them is important to us. The acceptance is very important to understand and also experience the cause of the emotion. After the acceptance, the emotion tends to become smaller, better understood, and therefore more subtle. When the mist of the enlargement of the emotion is lifted, the real cause of the emotion and of the deeper feeling becomes visible. Acceptance is also important because in the past we believed perhaps too much in intimidation and not enough in the so-called power of weakness. But as said, there is a very important and at the same time extremely subtle distinction. Subtle means that it is not black-white, not catchable in a simple formula. That means that understanding an explanation in this field is highly dependable on recognition. This word will become also an important subject to talk about later on. Recognition in our own subjective experience. But also that is relative, by the way, because even the most exact sciences depend ultimately on our own subjective imagination. If we do not want them, at least, to be purely instrumental. So in the end, we are always dependent on the good willing understander, but especially so with the distinction we mean. We are talking about the distinction between accepting and confessing or consenting. First, let us look more closely at the word acceptance. What does it mean? How can we describe it in a way that it helps us to understand and inwardly grasp and contain the distinction and its importance? Does acceptance of emotion mean that we give complete, unbounded liberty and license to emotion? What would that mean? I think it would mean in the end an enlargement of emotions or an enforcement of it in the individual and public field. Emotions have the quality that they can grow and tend to grow, especially when they are negative. We have all experienced it with negative emotions, as said. But first, let us think about something evident. How can we then describe positive emotion? That is, to start with, much more difficult and subtle to formulate and make recognizable than negative emotions. We can understand that feelings, emotions and thoughts that inspire us give understanding, meaning and clarity, are simple but nevertheless often tiny and subtle. Otherwise we would have found them long before. Gems are not openly found on the main road, but mostly kept in a hidden place, just like in nature itself. When the situation is acceptable and respectful, we can carry and show the gem. And when we are worthy, the gem will throw a light on us and the other way around. Positive emotion starts with a finding, a discovery, something that touches us, that touches our soul, something that creates an inner feeling. We can be so impressed by it that the inner feeling, that it becomes an emotion, a positive emotion. Most of us recognize this in relation with music. Tears of thrill may come. We all understand that it is not so easy to repeat or enlarge such an emotion endlessly. It is also not easy to transmit it. In fact, it is an art. So it is far from infectious, so to say. When we return to the negative emotions, we can see them often dramatized in movies, in literature, and even more in reality. Sometimes a trigger is needed for the intensification. We recognize it sometimes in comedies. The crookie is more angry when someone, mostly a slavey, starts arguing with him. But also can we see it in everyday experience that emotion, especially negative emotion, can enforce itself. Mostly the enforcement is accompanied by a thought, not a thought as a result of careful and conscious thinking, but as a consequence of the emotion itself. That thought reflects then mostly an additional source of offense or irritation. For example, an irritating gesture that in other circumstances would arouse no irritation at all, or some other saying or action in the past that is now seen in a highly irritating new light. Also, the thought can be something like, "Now he or she has made me angry. That's a small crime because it is very bad for me. Or for my image, perhaps, to be angry or to show my furiosity." These are interesting examples, there are many of them, of thoughts that are nevertheless not quite rational, but more a result, or perhaps even more or less a make of emotion itself. Next time we will more accurately study this meaning of emotion and thought.